The South Carolina Hall of Fame was founded in Myrtle Beach in 1973 to recognize and honor contemporary and past citizens who have made outstanding contributions to South Carolina's heritage, history, and progress.
One of the leading figures of our time is dead. Bernard Baruch, whose favorite office in later years was a park bench, was a quiet philanthropist who gave away the millions he accumulated as a financier and Wall Street broker.
Bernard Baruch was a giant of the first half of the 20th century. Born in 1870 in Camden, South Carolina, Bernard Baruch was one of 4 sons of Simon Baruch, a Jewish-German immigrant, and Isabel Wolfe Baruch. Isabel was from a wealthy Jewish family who had been living in South Carolina since the 17th century.
By the year 1800, shortly after the American Revolution, Charleston, South Carolina had the largest population of Jews of anywhere in North America.
Simon Baruch studied medicine at the South Carolina Medical College in Charleston and the Medical College of Virginia. He finished his studies a year after the start of the Civil War and enlisted as a Confederate Army surgeon. In 1880, the Baruchs moved from South Carolina to New York City. There, Bernard Baruch graduated from the College of the City of New York. As an alumnus, he made a substantial gift to his alma mater, and eventually it came to be called Baruch College. He quickly became a successful stockbroker and paid $18,000 for a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. In 1890, Bernard Baruch met Annie Griffin, an Episcopalian New Yorker.
Bernard Baruch and Annie Griffin courted for about 8 years. And it was 8 years before he was well established with money, and it was 8 years before her family could be convinced that Bernard Baruch was the right person. They courted in Central Park, married, and lived right in the city, and he continued his climb higher and higher on Wall Street. By 25, he had earned his first $1 million, and by age 35, he was a millionaire several times over and was already giving money away as a philanthropist.
And he is quoted as saying, almost rhetorically to himself, and I believe that a close paraphrase is of what good to a man or $1 million unless he does something with it.
Bernard Baruch attributed his interest in philanthropy to his parents.
Simon Baruch was very much of an ability to share his thoughts very clearly with his sons about their responsibilities in terms of philanthropy. And if you look at Bernard Baruch, he basically made a large amount of money, but he left this world having given it all away.
Baruch remembered the South fondly and traveled to South Carolina for hunting season.
In 1904, Bernard Baruch was a guest hunting in Georgetown County, and he was brought to plantations here on the southern end of the Waccamaw Neck. Bernard Baruch, as a guest of hunters, began to notice the abundance of wildlife and the variety of habitat here on the southern end of the Waccamaw Neck. He inquired about purchasing the property and found out that Hobcaw was for sale. He paid $3.15 an acre for what would become 17,500 acres, a number of plantations pieced back together again to recreate Hobcaw Barony, a colonial land grant.
Hobcaw quickly became a winter destination for the rich and famous. Guests arrived in Georgetown by train and were taken to Hobcaw on the Baruch yacht. The game was so plentiful that it was not unusual to bag 100 ducks in a morning. For those who didn't enjoy hunting, there was always the beach. Annie and Bernard Baruch had 3 children. For them, Hobcaw Barony was an immense, endlessly fascinating playground. Bernard Baruch's commitment to South Carolina, in addition to Hobcaw, extended to his birthplace of Camden. In 1912, he pledged $20,000 to the Camden Hospital.
He visited Camden, and he was so impressed by the earnestness, and he used that word, the earnestness with which people were going about making a hospital happen that he doubled his pledge to $40,000. It opened in 1913. 8 years later, in 1921, that hospital burned, and Bernard Baruch did it all over again. He left an incredible legacy, because here we are almost 100 years later, having grown into a comprehensive community healthcare system. But interestingly, still with the same mission, is to care for everyone in the county, regardless of their ability to pay. No one is ever turned away.
In April 1917, with war raging in Europe, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany. He called on Bernard Baruch to head up his War Industries Board. Baruch became part of Wilson's war cabinet, and after the war he accompanied the president to the Paris Peace Conference and fought with Wilson for the League of Nations.
It's a kind of interesting thing to think about, Baruch being so involved in the making of the peace for the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles, and his complete support for Wilson, for the League of Nations, and for not punishing Germany beyond the point where they could bear it.
Baruch continued to serve as an advisor to Presidents Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Baruch and Eleanor Roosevelt were close friends, and he donated generously to her favorite causes.
Mrs. Roosevelt saw the poverty in this country during the Depression, and one of the roles she took on was to become an ambassador of the poverty in this country. The very wealthy in this country, including Bernard Baruch, were taken into the places where the poor lived, with no running water, no food. No one of good heart could have ever seen that and not have been changed.
In April 1944, Baruch invited President Roosevelt to rest and recover his health at Hobcaw Barony.
Bernard Baruch offered Hobcaw to the president for a 2-week vacation. President Roosevelt, many believe, was able to add a year onto his life because of what became a month-long visit at Hobcaw.
Baruch was also an advisor to President Harry Truman.
He was appointed by President Truman to the Atomic Energy Commission, and at one of the early meetings of the United Nations, he came to make an impassioned plea for all nations to ban nuclear weapons as a means of war. He addressed the Security Council with his now famous statement,
"We are here to make a choice between the quick and the dead. That is our business."
His plan was not adopted, but he was ever the advisor to presidents. President-elect Eisenhower and Prime Minister Churchill met in his New York apartment to renew a wartime friendship. From President Wilson to President Kennedy, he was a frequent caller at the White House, where his advice was sought in many areas of international concern.
Baruch eventually sold Hobcaw Barony to his oldest daughter, Belle. She worked tirelessly to preserve the land from development. Today, the Belle W. Baruch Foundation owns and maintains Hobcaw Barony for education and research. Bernard Baruch died in 1965 at the age of 95. In his memoir, he wrote, "I have lived a long, long life, a full one and a good one. But above all, I've had the opportunity to serve my country. That has meant the most to me."